Welcome to The Biggest Table. I am not Andrew Camp. My name's Peter Englert. I'm a friend of Andrew. I'll tell a little bit about myself later. But the reason that I am hosting this podcast is we wanted to do an episode where you get to know Andrew because this is a great podcast. He loves faith, food, friends, family, all the F words there. But we just want to get it started. And so Andrew wouldn't have to introduce himself. I wanted to be a part of it. Just a little bit about me. I am an adult ministries pastor in Rochester, New York. I also host the podcast, the Why God Why podcast, and I'm also a co-host on Hope on the Rise. So Andrew, without further ado, how does it feel to be on the other side of the microphones?
It's great. It's a weird feeling. I've done other podcasts and been interviewed for other people's podcasts to be interviewed for your own podcast is interesting. But I think it'll be fun. And yeah, I'm excited to tell my story more.
Well, before we jump into your story, why don't you just give everybody an intro? Who is Andrew Camp?
Yeah. So no, I'm a former pastor. I'm a former chef. And while those two things feel disparate to some people, I think they've actually been very similar to me, which I think we'll dive into later. But I'm married to Claire, who's a psychologist, and we have two daughters, Hazel and Hannah. Both Peter and I are girl dads, which has been fun to watch his journey of parenting. And we currently live in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is, if you're listening and aren't familiar with Flagstaff, Flagstaff is not Phoenix. We're at 7,000 feet elevation, surrounded by one of the largest ponderosa pine forests. And yeah, we love it because we love to be outside hiking and exploring and just enjoying Flagstaff.
Before we get too serious in your story, which is a great intro, I want to just ask you some fast questions. Okay, so
Perfect.
let's start with this one. What's the best cut of beef?
It's not filet mignon. I'm not a big filet because I think fat equals flavor. And so with that, I'm a ribeye or a New York steak person. If I'm sharing a steak with my wife, Claire, I like New York because it's just an easier way to slice and share a steak. But if I'm eating one by myself, a good ribeye is lovely, especially the cap around the end. If you can get that perfect.
What was the last meal? And I'll be careful because as a girl dad, you might have had to make chicken nuggets. So what was
Yes.
the last kind of formal or last kind of chef oriented meal that you made, and who was it for?
Who was it for? The biggest one we did was for our anniversary, for Claire and I's anniversary. I made roasted corn ravioli, homemade, with the homemade pasta and corn, and then served it with a sour cherry sauce because we have a cherry tree in our yard, and then some crispy prosciutto and some arugula, and really all the flavors came together in a really good, fun way. And the girls loved the corn ravioli. We didn't give them all the accoutrements. They did like the crispy prosciutto because it was like bacon. But no, it was just a fun way to celebrate our anniversary, but also then bring our girls into it a little bit and continue to expose them to more than just chicken nuggets.
Well, there you go. You're doing better than me. I got two more quick questions, and we'll probably come back to a few more. If you could be on any TV show that is on cooking, and it doesn't even have to be a game show, but you could just be on it, what TV show would it be and why?
What's popping into my head is I would love to do the street food series with Netflix, just because I love street food in other cultures. I love seeing what the everyday person eats. Again, I think we'll get into this, but I lived in China for 3 years, and I loved the noodles. At night they had barbecue carts, shakao, I think is how you pronounce it, and so enjoyed street food. So I'd love to explore the world of street food in other countries and just find those hidden gem stalls with really good food.
Mm. All right. So here's the last one. Hopefully you've been doing great. You didn't even know these questions were coming.
No.
If you could recommend a movie about food, not a documentary, it
Oh,
has to be like a
yeah.
movie. If you could
Yes.
recommend a movie about food, what's the first one that comes to your mind?
Oh, that's easy. As soon as you said movie, it's Babette's Feast.
Oh,
It's
wow.
yeah. It's a hidden gem. A friend had told me about it while I was in seminary. I think it was a late 80s foreign film based on a short story by Isak Dinesen of the same name. And actually, in this instance, the movie is actually far superior to the short story just because of the pictures, in the visualization of the story. But it's about a community that's very rigid and fundamental in their beliefs. And Babette is a former highly trained French chef who comes to this community. And what she does with food to transform the community is truly beautiful and is a picture of really what I love about food.
Mm, Well, that's a good segue. Andrew, why don't you just tell us the story? So, really, your podcast is focused on faith and food and how it brings us together. Why don't you walk us through how those two areas of life have come together for you? And, why don't you kind of start back? I think it's college, and just let's go on a journey. I might interrupt you with some questions, but go at it,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So it actually starts, as I think about my journey, it starts earlier because my family always ate breakfast and dinner together around the table. So even, when my sister started high school and she had a zero period at whatever that god awful time is at 7 a.m., my parents would still make sure we were all at the table at like 6:15 to have breakfast together. And then every evening, we would have dinner together. I was fortunate. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, loved to cook, loved to bake. But the table was one of those central places and spaces for our family. And it wasn't a lively table. I don't remember much conversations, but it was a stable table. It was consistent. It provided me an anchor as I think back onto my own journey. Growing up, I was always the adventurous eater of our family. So whenever we went to a restaurant, I never wanted to order off the kids' menu. I always wanted to try something new. Whereas my sisters were more of the tried and true, like, well, they have chicken nuggets, so we're going to get chicken nuggets or fettuccine Alfredo. And I'm like, ooh, they have lobster pasta. Can I try lobster today or crab or shrimp? And so as I began to explore food, I just loved food and wanted to cook on my own and carry these traditions that my mom had given us to begin with. And so that's where it started. But it really, this journey of sort of the integration of food and faith really began for me in China, of all places. After I graduated from Biola University, I moved to China to serve as a youth pastor for missionary kids for 3 years. And it was in China that I began to notice, as I sat with other missionaries, that we just lingered at the table a lot. Long after the meal had been finished, we still sat at the table. And even though couches and way more comfortable chairs were close by, we sat in these very uncomfortable dining room tables and just lingered. And I began to wonder, like, okay, why? What is it about food that causes us to linger? And why are we content at a table? And so, yeah, it just began this journey. And as I read more, I came across a book from Eugene Peterson called Living the Resurrection. And in one chapter, he starts talking about food and meals. And in it, he has a sentence that, like, the disciples and the gospel writers are most fond of telling stories of Jesus around a table. And it was at one of those sentences that just like light bulbs and everything went off in my head. And it has sent me on a journey of exploring food and faith that I never expected, but have loved going through. And so, yeah, that's sort of the genesis of this story of how I began exploring this topic.
I want to come back. That's probably a good place to start. How did you get to China?
I did both undergrad and graduate work through Biola University. But while in undergrad, I was a Bible major, and so everybody thought I had my life figured out because, clearly I'm closer to Jesus than other people for some strange reason, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I would always tell people, I'm like, I don't know what I want to do, but I'm pretty sure God's not calling me to be a youth pastor or a missionary. And so then I'm attending the church I grew up in, which is EV Free Fullerton, and they had a long-standing relationship in China, have an adopted people group there since the mid 90s, I believe. And so I'm sitting there one actual Super Bowl Sunday, and the missions pastor gets up and says, "Hey, we need a team to go to China these dates to do some VBS for an NGO that's in China that's we're affiliated with." And I'm sitting there, and I remember I'm sitting midway in the sanctuary. I hear this audible go. I'm not a guy that hears audible thoughts and words and promptings from the Spirit a lot, but in this instance, it was as clear as day. And I don't remember anything else about the service except that I needed to figure out a way to work against traffic to get down to speak to the missions pastor. And so I said, "Hey, I'm interested," and the dates coincided with Biola's spring break, so I'd only miss 1 week of class, and all my professors were supportive of this idea. And it ended up my dad was leading the trip. And so I went and said, "Hey, I'll work with the youth. I'll do some stuff for the high schoolers or junior hires." And I absolutely just fell in love with China. Had been on other short-term trips to Mexico, one to Poland, and I'm like, I don't think missions work is for me. It's just not. I enjoy traveling, but this isn't who I think where God is calling me. And China just was different. And so after those 2 weeks, people were like, "Hey, if you want to come back for the summer, like, come on back. We'll figure out what to do with you. But you can explore and just see what else is going on." And so, I spent 2 months in China. And after those 2 months, felt like, no, I need to come back and I need to work with the youth here. They'd been looking for a youth pastor for the community, and really just sensed this is what God had for me for at least 2 years, and ended up staying for 3 post college. And so, China was a very rich, formative experience for me, just getting to know missionaries, working with a community that was diverse of 15 different nationalities at least, and every denomination in between. So in the youth group, we had everything from Assemblies of God to very Dutch Reformed. And normally, if you're in America, those two don't mix. But there, it worked beautifully and gave me this picture of what the church and the body can be when our differences aren't, where we don't have a choice, really. Like we have to be together, and we have to love each other and figure out how to coexist. And it just brought me a deeper appreciation for the diversity of experience of the body, from, growing up very white, evangelical, non-charismatic, to grow to have a rich appreciation for Pentecostal and Assemblies of God theology, and having a rich love of the Dutch Reformed and what they bring. And then all the while trying to walk this middle road where, I don't upset too many people all the time. And so, no, it just was a really rich, fun, growing experience for me.
That's great. Let's also back up a little bit. You explained a lot of the faith side of it. This story reminds me when I grew up Assemblies of God. I'm now in a non-denominational church, so I understand what you're saying. Let's kind of keep moving the story forward. So at some point you decided to leave China, and then also you got married, and then there's a little bit of a parallel of working in the food industry and working for a church. So bring us up to speed on that, and just your background.
Yeah. So when I moved back from China, it was to pursue my master's at Talbot, and it's in spiritual formation and soul care, and really wanted to understand my heart more. And again, a lot of this was formed by Eugene Peterson. I'm naturally live in my head. I love to read. I love the thought life. I love exploring good books and good theology, but knew I needed to get in touch more with my feelings and my heart. And that's what the Institute for Spiritual Formation did for me. Opened up my heart in new ways to experience God's love. Simultaneously to going to my master's, I was living right next door to my grandpa. And my grandpa figures important into this because growing up, my grandpa didn't like kids. He I don't know if he hated us, but he never really wanted us around. And so, but he also loved really good food and good wine. And so when I got back, I'm living next door to him, literally like walking distance. And so I take a chance because my sister had done it. And I say, hey, Grandpa, could I cook for a meal for you? And he's like, sure. What do you want to cook? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll figure it out. And he's like, great. Whatever you want to cook, I'll reimburse you for the ingredients and I'll provide the wine. And I'm like, great. You know, like I'm a starving seminary student. Like I don't have a lot of money. And so I just start cooking for him. And I forget what we first cooked for him, but one of the first dishes I believe I made for him was like a shrimp in a champagne beurre blanc sauce because my grandpa loves champagne. You know, and a beurre blanc sauce is a very delicate French sauce of basically butter emulsified with a little wine, you know, and so it breaks easily. It's not easy, you know, but I just start cooking and we start spending time at the table. And not just time, we spend hours, you know, and it's time where he just starts sharing about his journey and his life and his regrets and his loves. And through that, I see a different side to my grandpa than I ever saw, while also learning to cook and loving to cook. And I'm like, hey, I'm actually good at this. Like, okay, there's more to this. And it's in seminary. And again, ISF is opening up my heart in new ways to what God might have for me. And I'm like, okay, food keeps playing a role in this. And so I think I need to go to culinary school while also doing seminary, while also working part-time, because I'm single at the time. And it's like, what if I don't do it now, when will I ever do it? And so halfway through seminary, I decide to go to culinary school at Le Cordon Bleu in Pasadena. And so, yeah, it begins to open these new horizons. And through culinary school and through a birthday dinner at Palate Food and Wine, I land a job at Palate Food and Wine, which was at the time one of the best new restaurants in the nation. Drop out of culinary school because I figured, well, why pay to go to culinary school when I can get on the job training? You know, and at the time, when I started at Palate Food and Wine, I think I started at $8.50 an hour in LA, you know, which that doesn't cover rent, let alone a culinary school bill. But again, it was taking steps to explore where God might have me, you know, and Palate Food and Wine didn't work out just for various reasons. And so I left Palate, started working at a Christian camp as a cook, which sounds weird, but it was Forest Home Family Christian Camp, and they were trying to do more from scratch cooking and do different things and make camp food not just, you know, slop. And so we made mashed potatoes from real potatoes every night. I think the first summer I was at Forest Home, I did like 2 tons of potatoes that were turned into mashed potatoes. So like when people ask me like about mashed potatoes, I'm like, oh, like I've cooked a lot of mashed potatoes in my life, Peter. But when I do cook mashed potatoes, and here's a little, you know, tidbit, it's 2 pounds of potatoes and 1 pound of butter, period. Like it's more butter than potatoes at times, just because the only way to make potatoes taste good is by adding lots and lots of butter. But my girls love them, as do most people, because again, it's a little potato with a lot of butter. So, you know, but yeah, so that's sort of the rough shot of, you know, how I got there. And then in the midst of this, all of a sudden I am invited on a blind date, you know, by some friends who I hadn't talked to in 2 years. And so this is the summer of 2009. I'm wrapping up my first summer at Forest Home. And this couple I known through EV Free Fullerton, but then the husband had also done the same master's program. She Facebook messages me out of the blue. I haven't talked to him in 2 years. And she's like, "Hey, Andrew, this is Jen Castillo. Like, are you interested in going on a blind date with my friend Claire? She's pursuing her doctorate in clinical psychology from Azusa Pacific University here. And she's also served as a missionary for 2 years in Mexico. We think you guys might enjoy each other." And I'm like, "Sure, why not? What do I got to lose?" You know? And so I say yes to this blind date, not knowing anything, not knowing what I'm getting myself into, but I'm like, okay, Dave and Jen Castillo, they're a great couple. It'd be great to reconnect with them. They're great people, so the chances of Claire being a great person are high. So even if there's no romantic interest, like, she's going to be a decent human being as well.
Do you
so
think,
then they asked,
did you have the thought though that maybe she had like a clinical project and like she was gonna analyze you? Because I'm married to a mental health therapist, and my dad always makes the joke. He's like, "You're writing
Right.
a paper about our family," you know?
Yeah, no, that is the running joke. I didn't think that, actually. It was more
Okay.
because I love the mind, you know, and want to marry somebody I can have robust conversations with. I'm like, "Oh, this sounds intriguing," because we can actually talk about the human soul in deeper ways, right? You know, and that we share this love of academics. I think I love academics more than she does, even though she has the higher degrees. But it's been great because we can talk about faith, and we can talk about what's impeding us and what's helping us, and how do we want to help others. So no, it's been actually really enjoyable for the most part, like any marriage. But where food factors into this, and why I want to mention the blind date, is because my friends tell me to bring a dessert. And so as a chef, I can't just bring any dessert, right? Like, I can't just bring boxed brownies, but nor can I play all my cards, you know, on the first date, right? Because then it's just downhill. Like, I got nothing left. And so I settled on a cheesecake, like a New York style cheesecake with fresh berries. Again, returning to China, in China, I actually baked a lot of cheesecakes. I became, you know, the students loved my cheesecakes. Other people loved my cheesecakes. It was a way of me just to have fun and bake cheesecakes. And so I was like, okay, I'll make a cheesecake. It's safe. It's easy. I've done it a million times. And so the night before I was going to bake the cheesecake, I'm actually down at my parents', because I would stay the night at my parents' before seminary classes. And they had a carton of Thrifty's chocolate malted crunch ice cream. And I grew up on Thrifty's ice cream in Southern California, where it was the 25-cent cylindrical cone of goodness that we would walk down to and get. And I'm eating this and I'm like, this would make a great cheesecake. Like, how could I make chocolate malted crunch into a cheesecake? And so all that night, I'm like literally thinking about a cheesecake, you know? And I'm like, okay, I think I'm supposed to do this, like, as weird as it all sounds. And so I figure out how to get, you know, look up chocolate malted cheesecakes and figure out how to do that. And then I'm like, maybe I can incorporate Whoppers into the crust and some on top, and maybe do like a chocolate Kahlua ganache on top as well. And I actually think I focused more on the cheesecake during my seminary classes the next day than the actual classes. I don't even remember what classes I was in. And so I baked this cheesecake. And the date went well. Obviously, we're married now. And it was such a delightful experience that day. And the next couple of days, I'm reflecting on this cheesecake. And I'm beginning to think about it, and like, okay, I threw out a recipe. I didn't play it safe. I experimented. And I began to wonder, as I approach this new relationship with Claire, like, am I supposed to throw out recipes and just give her me, not play it safe, let her see me? And if she rejects me, at least she was rejecting me and not a safe, contained Andrew, which is how I've had generally approached relationships in the past. And so that cheesecake became more than a cheesecake. It became a metaphor of like, okay, I'm not going to play it safe. I'm going to let her see me. I'm going to let my true colors come out and experiment and see what happens when I throw out the recipes and just sort of try to create something new and fresh. And so that it's weird, how a cheesecake becomes a guiding metaphor for me in this relationship, to such the degree that our wedding party favors were chocolate malt balls, with the story of the cheesecake and the recipe for the cheesecake.
Hold on 1 second. I'm assuming this, but for our listeners,
Yeah,
did she like the cheesecake?
she loved the cheesecake.
Okay. Did she have a relationship with Thrifties and ice cream and Whoppers too?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, not as much as me, and she enjoyed it, but yeah, it wasn't as nostalgic for her as it was for me. But no, she really liked the cheesecake and was like, "Oh man, this guy can cook."
So let's and we'll continue with the story. I think this is super powerful. I'm definitely enthralled by this story. You and I talk on the phone, so just to see each other is pretty powerful. But you almost talk about making this cheesecake as if the voice of God spoke to you. And I guess as you reflect on like this pivotal situation, pivotal situation, don't tell your wife I said that. Maybe a pivotal moment, but what, besides like be who God made you, what were some other spiritual significance about this moment and this cheesecake and this double date? Because it sounds like God was doing something pretty radical in your life.
That's a great question. No, it was a very deep spiritual experience. And I think for me, and I think it had started prior, but it was God. A lot of the food journey for me has been about God seeing my heart and my passion and saying, enjoy. Like, I see it, enter into it, and let's explore it and see what comes. It hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been quote unquote enjoyable. But as I reflect on it in a more holistic way, not just about the cheesecake, food has become an arena in which I delight in God and I feel God's delight in me. And I feel confident. I feel like, oh, this is who, in some small ways, maybe not in small ways, in some way, like this is who God created me to be. And as I'm talking, I'm reminded of like Eric Little's quote of when he's running, that he just feels, I'm going to butcher it now, but like, that he just feels the pleasure of God when he runs. And for me, when I'm cooking and in the kitchen, there are instances where it's like, this is good and this is right. And so, yeah, I think it's been a way for me to experience God's delight in me in ways that I don't often get.
That's super powerful. Let's hold on to that thought because you still got more to the story. But I think that listeners, as you listen to Andrew's podcast, you need to remember what he just said there about the intersection of faith, about God delighting. And, I just leave you with this question, as a listener, what is that for you? So, but Andrew, so you marry Claire. I think last we left off professionally, you were making 2 tons of potatoes.
Yep.
And 2 tons of potatoes per summer or whatever. Can't wait to try your mashed potatoes. Thank you for the tip. Butter and potatoes, 50-50. But take us from there.
With Claire finishing her degree, her last year of the degree is this nationwide internship matching program. And, we're in Southern California. Neither of us like Southern California. Neither of us like the concrete jungle, the sitting in traffic, the lots and lots of people. So we're like, we don't have kids. We're at this perfect stage where like, let's explore. And so as she's thinking of where to apply, I told her, okay, the only criteria I need met for me is that I need to be able to find a job cooking that is of interest to me. And I said, that can be Southern barbecue, that can be regional cuisine, or it can be fine dining. Like I'm not stuck in this, it has to be fine dining and it has to be this mecca, right? I'm open to exploring whatever. And so she applies all over the nation, from Vermont to Washington to Louisiana to Evanston, Wyoming, which is not a food mecca, but was an hour away from Park City, Utah, which is a huge skiing resort town with lots of restaurants. And so that became her top choice, and she got matched to her top choice. And so we find out we're moving to Park City, Utah. And so I began exploring different areas and restaurants and seeing what's available even before we move, and actually made contact with a few chefs, and one in particular that I thought I would work for, and that never panned out. But ended up working at Silver Restaurant, which was on Main Street in downtown Park City, and really loved that restaurant, and went in as a novice line cook. I did banquets at this Christian camp, and so now I'm working on the line, which is a very different beast than banquet cooking. And they didn't think I could do it, but eventually I figure it out. And within 2 years, I'm promoted to sous chef, which means under the executive chef, I'm basically second in command, and helping run the kitchen and helping run the line and ordering food and directing the team on certain nights. And again, working a line is exhilarating, and it can be frustrating, and because you're around, it's 120 degrees on a line on a good day, just because you're around the ovens and the stoves all the time, and you're moving. And but to see a team come together is beautiful, and to celebrate afterwards, and to enjoy that camaraderie that exists in the kitchen was super fun. But at the same time, cooking professionally was never the end goal for me in pursuing this food and faith idea. It was the means to an end. It was me to learn more about food and to gain confidence cooking and to explore flavors and nuances and creating. And so I'm slowly becoming like, okay, this isn't the life we want. For instance, at my last winter there, being sous chef, I would kiss my wife, I would kiss Claire goodnight on Monday night, and then I wouldn't see her awake until Saturday morning when I rolled out of bed at about 10, after having worked until midnight the night before. And so again, that's just not the life we hoped for. Certain people can make it work, but it wasn't what we wanted. And I'm working every day that I'm working so other people can have fun and not having the community that we want. And so I began thinking, maybe it's time to return to ministry and return to the church and help others experience more of what I've been experiencing these past few years. But was just striking out on finding a job. But in May of 2015, Silver was sold out from under us, and all of a sudden I find myself unemployed. Sold out from under us, meaning like this executive chef went to the restaurant one day and the locks had been changed. And so the next day, like we're over there packing up the restaurant, and I did, my severance was some really good bottles of whiskey, which, made up for a little of the hurt and the pain. But in this instance, all of a sudden I find myself without a job. I was offered other numerous cooking jobs and just didn't feel like it was right to step back into. And so with where Claire was professionally and being fully licensed and making money, I was like, what about becoming an unpaid intern at the church we were working at, just to gain some experience? And so I became an unpaid intern at Mountain Life Church in Park City, which we'd been attending for a few years since moving there. And I knew there was no job, but I knew the executive pastor really well. And I said, I just need experience. I need to get my foot in the door someplace. And he says, great, like we'll help you. We'll do whatever we can. And so, yeah, started working there but worked my way into a job, and which was great because we had started developing community with other people. And we found out Claire was pregnant, and we're like, we don't really want to move and start all over again right when we're having a newborn baby. And so everything turned out well, where I stepped into this role a couple months before Hazel was born, and stayed at Park City for 5 years working full time. And it was a trying experience because we did COVID through in Park City, and birth of our 2 girls, and trying to figure out what ministry was like. Started a Latino ministry with some other couples, and really wrestled through what is ministry. And then felt like the time was coming where is this where we really want to raise our girls? Park City has some really great things about it, but also some not so great things. And so we just started looking for other opportunities for me, and came across a church in Flagstaff, which we never thought Arizona would be on the table because we affiliated Arizona with desert, and we like the mountains. Claire was like, I want to move someplace green. Like that was her number one request. And so she was like, okay, I showed her some pictures, and she's like, okay, you can pursue it. And eventually they fly us out. And I remember Claire telling me, as the plane's landing in Flagstaff in a really small airport, she just sees the green all around her. And she's like, okay, maybe we can make this work, and taking a step off the plane and, smelling the pine, and so, yeah, we ended up in Flagstaff, and that didn't quite go as planned either. And I'm currently in a in-between season where I'm not quite sure what's next, but sort of provided me this time and the space to start this podcast and to explore anew and afresh this deep passion. And it's like, okay, like nothing else has been opening up save for this continual push towards food and faith. And so again, Claire's at a space where her private practice is doing well enough where it's like it's afforded us some flexibility for me to try some things. And so here I am once again, I feel like I'm stepping out in faith, into this dark abyss where I don't know what's going to happen. But again, it's brought a sense of joy, and delight, and think people have been responsive, and you're like, okay, maybe I found a niche here that's worth continuing to pursue. And so that's sort of, again, where we're at.
So we're going to come back to food in a little bit, but I kind of want to go to faith. I think one of the knocks on pastors is they're not authentic and real enough. And I've heard a few of your podcasts. You're fairly authentic and real, transparent, which is a good thing. But let me ask you this. So on my podcast, a person that's had a huge influence on my life, his name's Ron Hall. He was my professor. He actually got paralyzed in a surfing accident. And, so he and I just talked, and we just had an episode, and we talked about the 4 seasons of spirituality. The first season is life is good, God feels near. The second season is life is good, God feels far. The third season, life is hard, God feels near. And the fourth season is life is hard and God feels far. Today, I'm on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast. We'll touch more on that later. Which one of those seasons resonate with you the most, and why?
Life is hard and God feels far. And I think that's for both Claire and I during this season of just wrestling and having this idea and this belief that's not always accurate, but that if I do certain things, life is going to line up for me pretty well, right? Like, making the right decisions, making sound, informed decisions, making, not being careless, pursuing degrees will lead to the right job, will lead to the right life. And that's just not what it's been like for us in this season. And so, yeah, it's been a hard season of knowing, okay, where is God and what is God up to? Because we can't do anything. Finding a job has been more difficult than I thought it would be. Being home, you know, while it has its perks, has also been hard and challenging. And so, it's just sort of, okay, God, what are you up to? And do you still see me? And even though I feel delight in this podcast, like there are other times where it's like, okay, why doesn't any of this make sense? And so, it's been a harder season in which God hasn't felt close.
Tell us, I think this is going to be helpful for our listeners. So we don't slap cliches on. Tell us about like your prayer life and reading the Bible. Just be honest, but also, just kind of maybe there's glimpses of where God is, but I think it'd be helpful for our listeners. Like, where are you at in all of those practices?
Yeah, I wish I could say I excel at those practices, but I don't. Bible reading has been one of the hardest things for me since I was a kid. Always growing up in the evangelical world of like read your Bible and pray every day, just was always a hard pill for me to swallow. And then studying scripture academically just didn't probably help. But what has helped sometimes is our apps. I've enjoyed the Lectio 365 app of just listening and being guided in prayer, or the Pause app by John Eldridge, of just somebody else praying for me and inviting me has been helpful at times, just because as much as I know about scripture and as much as I've helped others, I need the help at times. I need somebody else just to pray and give me the words to pray. And so, those have been the most helpful.
If you were to describe this season as a food dish or a recipe, how would you describe it to our listeners?
What comes to mind, and I don't use it lightly, is a couple of times we've done a Passover Seder. And during a Passover Seder, you eat the bitter herbs. And as a reminder, I believe, of just the bitterness of slavery and the hardship. And so, like, the idea of bitterness comes to mind in a way. But not fully bitter, because there's still some sweetness, and being able to cook more or be able to be at home more with our girls. Or, this past Monday, we made Chinese wontons, together from scratch, and just trying to help them enjoy food more and get them cooking more. And so those are some sweet times, and then after dinner, we drove to this house nearby that does the big Christmas light show and just sat in our car for 30 minutes, just listening. And then our girls got out at one point and started dancing to the music too. So, I don't know if there's a dish, but if the flavors were there, it would be a bitterness, but with some strong hints of sweetness mixed in.
It's interesting about that. You're not the only one that loves Eugene Peterson. And, God must have a little sense of humor, because I'm reading the book, Eat His Book Again.
Yeah.
And in the first 2 chapters, he quotes Revelation, and the Apostle John talks about, I ate the scroll that tasted sweet, but was bitter in my stomach. How based on what you just said, which was so beautiful, and I hope your listeners are hearing, like, you're not just throwing out the Christian cliches, like you're in the middle of a really hard season trying to find God, and just like all of us, whether we're a pastor or not. But as you kind of think of what Eugene Peterson said and what the Apostle John says in Revelation, how does that hit you about eat this book, eat it so that, it tastes like honey, but it's bitter in your stomach?
I think it's the not so subtle but hard reminder that the spiritual life's not easy. Like it's not it's not a simple equation. It's not a do more, try harder type of life. It's not. I read a lot of Andrew Root, in his ministry in the secular age and finishing up his last book. And, he in his last book, he talks about a lot of heroic action and inner genius and how they're the two defining moments of our culture. And how often the church wants inner genius or heroic action instead of confession and surrender. And so it's that reminder that no matter what I try, no matter how hard I go at it, I have to be willing to receive and be open. And at times I don't want to. At times I wish there was enough power within me to fix it. I wish I could make it easy for our family. I wish when my daughter asks me why I don't go to Christ Church anymore, like that, she wants me at Christ Church, that I wish I could tell her, yes, let's go back to Christ Church and everything will be fine. But that's not where we're at right now. There's still healing that needs to happen for me. But I wish that wasn't the case. And yet here we are. And so even as I'm talking, the table is full of delight, but there's also at times flavors we need to experience to stretch us, and to be open to the new and the different, not just for the new and the different sake, but to receive something different. Like I don't ask my girls to eat asparagus and broccoli, and try new foods because it's good for them. But I want them to know something more to life than chicken nuggets, than Kraft mac and cheese, than DiGiorno pizza. I want them, I want them to taste and see that the Lord is good in multiple ways, and good in not just in the ice cream way, but good in the bitter way too. That there are, the Chinese have this dish it's a bitter squash, and it is bitter, but they eat it because it needs to be juxtaposed with other flavors, and it's that harmony and the balance of Chinese cooking. And I think we need to remember that too, and I need to remember that too in my own spiritual life, of the bitterness that is real. And I don't like it, and I want it to end quickly, but it's there.
I want to go back to your grandpa just for a second, because you've talked a lot about food being bitter, and I don't want to read too much in, but it sounds like before that moment that you lived next door to him, you didn't really have a relationship. And I guess as we kind of talk about bigger tables, I think the hesitancy is, am I going to be stuck at a table with someone that I don't want to be with? And so I'm curious about how you stepped into that table, and maybe what the relationship was like, but how the table changed that relationship.
Yeah. I stepped into it with fear and trepidation, not knowing. Because again, my grandpa at times wasn't a nice person, but I also wanted to cook, and I was fresh back from China, and I was lonely and I was struggling. And so again, it was taking a chance and taking a risk, and not knowing what to expect, but also knowing my sister had a good experience with it. So hopeful too, that maybe there's something here that I can glean. But sitting at the table, I saw a different side of my grandpa than I ever had seen before, where the rough edges went away, the grumpiness went away. He still had some weird thoughts and ideas, but that's fine. Like, he's not perfect. But I saw a man who had done a lot in life, but also regretted not loving more, and wishing he had done better to love my grandma, who had had a massive stroke when I was 12. And so yeah, like, I think we are worried that we're going to be stuck at a table with someone we don't like. But in that instance with my grandpa, I began to see a man who loved fiercely in a very different way than I think I would have thought, but who did the best he could given his childhood, which then helped my dad do the best he could, which is now helping me do the best I could. And hopefully it's a little better than the previous generation. But it just became this warm place where we were in each other's company and hear stories and to love each other. Was beautiful, to the point where when he passed away, I was like, I want to eulogize him. Like, I want to share, like, at his funeral, because of the transformation I saw and of the restored relationship that developed because we ate together and drank together.
So I asked that question because I think kind of in your raw state, this is somewhere where you can be really helpful. Sometimes you go to the table because you need healing from somebody you trust. And sometimes it takes a bunch of courage to go to a table to heal because it's someone that has hurt you. And I think the issue is, if you're not in that seat, and I've been through similar as you have, and people say things to try to be helpful and kind. Today, in the year of our Lord, what is today? Is today December 6th that we're doing this?
Yes.
2023. Knowing that the table can be a healing place, but sometimes you need to be with someone that's going to shepherd and care for you. Other times you need to be with someone that has hurt you, for that process to start. How do you navigate that? What are some of the first thoughts that come to your head?
You ask good questions that are making me Peter's not letting me off the hook. How do you navigate that? I think for me in this instance, it takes time. Like, I want there to be reconciliation and restored relationships with the hurt that we've experienced. But I'm not ready yet. And so right now I need friends and people who are safe and who can guide and hold me. And there will come a moment where I won't be fully ready, but ready enough to step into a table experience for healing to occur in the broken relationships. I think in the Christian world, we want to rush to make that happen without allowing the space for healing to take place, where it can be fully received on both sides. And so, yeah, it just takes time.
Mm. I really appreciate that. And I think it's kind of like the heart of this podcast, because we can't always explain spiritual things as directly as we like. And food is this beautiful picture. I'm probably going to butcher this, pun intended, but I'll let you clean up whatever mess I leave here. But I've I've never cooked a beef Wellington, and I am absolutely scared out of my mind to cook a beef Wellington, and that's a huge confession on this podcast. But I think the fear is kind of what you're saying. It's I'm going to follow the directions absolutely right, and I'm going to make sure that the the bread covering over it, that the meat, the sauce. But when I put that in the oven, I I don't know when I cut it open if it's gonna be like so well done that I might have just put it on the fire without a grill cover, or if it's gonna be so raw that I don't even know how to fix it, if I have to microwave it or something like that, or if the meat's perfect but the bread's burned, like,
Right.
is that a good description kind of what you're feeling? I don't know. That was a thought.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the beauty of food, and cooking and doing it together too. But that try as we might, it doesn't guarantee success. But that doesn't stop us from trying again or tweaking or learning. And somebody once told me like food is a great metaphor for like sin in the spiritual life, because you're never going to hit the mark perfectly when you cook. Like there is no perfect dish. There's always room for improvement or tweaking or nuance. And I think we want that perfect dish, but we can never do it. And so we just, when the dish fails, and beef Wellington is a expensive failure, like it's, in time, I've never done a beef Wellington either, but there's a lot of steps, and you're buying a beef tenderloin, which isn't cheap, and so the ingredients are expensive, and it's a multi-hour ordeal just to get it in the oven. And so that's a costly mistake, but the next day you still have to get up and cook again, and you still have to eat. And even if it fails, you still have to feed people. And so maybe it's just ordering pizza and laughing at the mistake, but I think that's the beauty of food, is that no matter how often we fail, we try again.
Hmm. Why don't we kind of close with this? Few more questions. So I did a lot of food. I did a lot of food questions in the beginning. I actually want to get some of your quick responses. I want to take some theological or doctrine, and I want you to picture it as food. I'm not going to ask the Trinity because that's really loaded. um,
Yeah.
and I don't want your Talbot or My Valley Forge or other professors to come. But let's start with this. If there's a food that helps you describe the gospel, what would that be?
The gospel. Well, it's just a loaded term in and of itself. The first food that came to my mind, and stick with me, is a strawberry. And I think maybe it's because of the state I am in, but each strawberry is so delicate that every strawberry has to be picked by hand. No machine can do it. And so, but a strawberry, especially growing up in California, we had beautiful strawberries in the spring, right? Like if you've never tasted a vine ripened California strawberry, you've missed out on something. Because a strawberry in that state there's richness, there's sweetness, there's texture, and each one is unique. And I think that's the gospel, in that like Jesus sees us in our state and is gentle enough to handle us with care. And so, yeah.
Grace.
What about coffee? Let's try coffee. Only because I love coffee, and I love a good pour over, and I love well roasted coffee. Again, where mint black coffee, where you taste the nuances and you taste the particularities of it. And yet the warm, comforting nature of a cup of coffee, especially in the morning or with a good book. There's nothing quite like it. So again, the particularities of a good coffee. Maybe it's like grace.
You have my 100% support for coffee on that one. So, forgiveness.
Forgiveness. If there's a food that means like forgiveness. I don't know if there's a food, but I think it's an experience. And I think I'm thinking of a story in which when Claire and I were first married, I'd had a rough day at work. I think this was when one of my nephews was having some major health issues. And I go home and I cook some chicken legs on the grill, except they were still raw in the middle. And I'd had a rough day. I was on my wit's end, and I serve raw chicken to Claire, and I'm like, I lose it. And I just can't handle it. And yet in that instance, she lovingly just, it's okay. We can microwave it. We'll figure it out. It's not the end of the world. And so maybe it's not a food, but maybe it's that experience when you do completely fail at cooking, and yet you still find love from the other person.
Joy.
I think it's I'm going to say tomatoes, and stick with me again here, because again, this is when I was working at Forest Home, I would drive past this tomato stand, and during summer, they had heirloom tomatoes. And they had not just one or two, but they had the full rainbow of tomatoes. And up until this point, I wasn't a tomato person. But I would stop and get fresh heirloom tomatoes from this in different colors. And Claire and I would just sample tomatoes and taste the different flavors. And it was the joy of a perfectly ripe tomato. It's hard to beat. Or any perfectly ripe vegetable, like vegetable or fruit, when you get that bite that you're like, oh, this is what an apple, like a Honeycrisp apple should taste like, or this is a tomato versus a store-bought Roma tomato in the middle of January.
Last one. Peace.
I'm going to do the cliche. I'm going to say grilled cheese and tomato soup. And again, when we make tomato soup, we make it from scratch. And when I make a grilled cheese, Claire always mocks me because I take a half hour to make a grilled cheese sandwich so that the bread's perfectly toasted. But our girls love it. We love it. And to sit down with a bowl of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich just feels comforting and peaceful.
Wow. Andrew, this has been such an honor, and I think that's a great place to close. So why don't we kind of give the final, just kind of final remarks. So right now, I think you're on Apple Podcast and YouTube. But is there one last thing that you? Oh, Spotify too. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's a great podcast host right there. Anything else that you want to add about this podcast?
No, it's just it's a journey I'm on, and I'm thankful for the people who are joining me on this journey to sort of see, and it's been fun to talk to the guests I've had and to hear their stories, and to just see where food and faith can lead us as we explore what it means to follow Jesus.
Well, I'm going to say this because it's recorded. You're definitely going to have to post this one at the top. I think people are going to want to listen to hear you before they listen to the other episodes. But this has been a joy and a sacred privilege to just, this is just me and you having coffee with hundreds of listeners. How does that sound?
Perfect. I love it. Appreciate you. I really appreciate you, Peter, reaching out and suggesting this and taking your time to do this for me. So no, I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you to all you listeners. One of the best things you can do, and I can say this because I'm not a host on this podcast, you're not only going to want to listen to this, you're going to want to share it, review it, share it on social media, text it to your friends. And we are so glad that you joined us at the biggest table.